What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Longevity, peptides, cellular communication, telomeres. We've heard the terms. We're going to do a deep dive today. I brought in an expert and the founder of the Human Longevity Institute, Dr. Melissa Petersen.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Melissa.
Thank you for having me. So wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. So it took us a little bit to get you on. You and Dr. Holtorf, I think you guys are drinking the same drink because I had to basically send out a search party to get you on. But hey, that's okay. You're here now, and that's what's important.
Listen, I am so sorry. I literally was telling your wonderful assistant, I'm like, I promise I'm not usually this hard to get in touch
Yeah.
with, but we have been growing exponentially at the Institute. And yes, my days have become longer and longer and hiring in more people. And just it's been a lot. But thank you guys for your patience. So we're gonna have a great conversation to make it worth the wait for sure.
Absolutely. So you're a chiropractic physician, and you've been doing that for a minute. I mean, I know you're
Mhm.
only 27, so like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how long, like when you first started your chiropractic practice, were you incorporating nutrition and wellness, or were you just adjusting? And what did that transition look like?
Well, here's the arc. I would say I started in wellness at the age 2.5. I started dancing. By the time I was in sixth grade, I was in the gym working out. So as a dancer, you're already very athletic, right? And so working out by sixth grade, by time I was entering college, I was choreographing. By time I left college, I had my nutrition degree. I mean, I was going to go to law school, but everything I did was all around wellness. And so before it was even a thing. I was a nutritionist, I was a personal trainer, I was a fitness instructor, I was running gyms and programs. So that's kind of where I started. And I did not expect to become a chiropractor. I was very much planning to become an attorney, never thought I would be a doctor. So much so, I hated sciences. Like I avoided them like the plague. So it was very interesting, kind of the turn of events. And it was a very strange, interesting, beautiful twist. My dog had gotten really sick. I was leasing apartments by day, bartending by night, getting ready to start law school in 6 months. I was in this kind of gap phase and I was teaching fitness classes. And my neighbors, that were my residents, two of my residents were doctors at the local chiropractic university. And they had other courses there, but like the main at that time was chiropractic. So long short, my mom's calling me, telling me they're going to put my dog to sleep. I'm bawling on the phone. Dr. Guy calls on the other line for like he needed, maintenance at his place or something. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, Melissa, are you okay? What is going on?" And I'm like, "They're gonna put the dog to sleep. She can't use her back legs." He's like, "If they're gonna do that, please just ask them to wait. We've got nothing to lose. Let me find a chiropractor." They lived in Pennsylvania. I was in Atlanta. I was like, "Okay, okay." I get on the other line. I'm like, "Mom, don't do anything. Like, don't do anything. We're gonna take her to a chiropractor." So I got on a plane, took her to a chiropractor. Sure enough, within, just 2 visits, she started to regain some use of her 2 back legs. I said, "Hey, I promise you, I don't know what this chiropractic stuff is, but I'm gonna go figure this out. Like, this just helped you." Like, she was my, like my I'm an animal lover, and she was like my first she was my dog. And so that kind of led me on the path, which that's just one other beginning. And boy, it's evolved since then because I graduated in 97 with that doctorate. Yeah.
Awesome. And you went to Life, right?
Oh, into Life University. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And so Life, I think, is probably the most well-known or one of the most well-known chiropractic
Yeah.
schools. I
Yeah.
lived in Roswell for 2 years,
You were
Georgia.
you were right around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had Ryan Cedarmark on the show. He's a chiropractic neurologist and nurse practitioner. He's in Atlanta. So a lot of
Nice.
Atlanta connections. But
For
the
sure.
Human Longevity Institute, when did you found that? And what was your sort of guiding force for that?
Yeah. So my foray into longevity started probably 6.5 years ago, like really taking a deep dive, looking at the sciences, understanding, because still at that point, from a healthcare landscape, the very popular mode of healthcare was like the big thing was functional medicine. And that's what we did in my practice. I had an integrative practice. We did physical medicine, functional medicine. We had a very, very successful practice. We were all over TV on Atlanta. I was interviewed all over, had health segments and things like that. And while I really enjoyed it, one of the things, because of my background in lifestyle, my biggest complaint, so to speak, with any healthcare approach is that we're looking to treat problems when fundamentally the body isn't broken. So when we have signs and symptoms, we don't understand that they're not actually bad. They're actually the body giving us insight and intel to where the system is out of balance, too much or too little, and how we can begin to give the body more of what it does need, less of what it doesn't need to restore that homeostasis. And so, you know, healthcare is just take a pill, stay on a pill, and manage symptoms forever and ever. So, functional medicine was one step better to say, well, let's see if we can do fewer pills. Let's get to the root cause. Let's kind of clean out, some of those underlying factors that are inhibiting the expression of healing and health. But a lot of that became by way of supplements. So then a lot of people were paying a lot of money for very advanced diagnostics, which are phenomenal, but then paying even more money for supplementation helped them. But when they'd finished the care plan, this is what we found. So I'm not saying as a whole, but what we found historically is after they'd finished their care plan, their 9 month, that they still hadn't, and we were huge with lifestyle and really, I mean, we took them to Whole Foods and taught them how to shop. We taught them how to read labels. Like we did cooking classes. We were very interactive with our client care and our programs. But fundamentally, like people would still, we all have lives. We
Right.
live with families. We live in busy, overloaded worlds. And so once they thought the problem was gone, they just continued to do what they did before. And so inevitably things would start to come back. So it always felt like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And so my point to you is that, I found my way to longevity. My mother passed away. We're coming up now. It's the 18-year anniversary of her passing in just a few days. And she passed days after she turned 54. And it was so unnecessary. So I watched an arc of life leave the body. Like what happens when we lose purpose, when we have a life of like bad environments, high stress, unhealthy relationships, right? How we soothe ourselves with food or alcohol or TV or whatever it is, versus the things that can really provide true care, self-care, self-love, and allow us to actually thrive. And so when I watched her leave the world early, even though I knew I lived my life very differently, I couldn't help but just kind of be like, oh my gosh, is that going to be my fate too? And of course, I knew that it wasn't. But if anybody thinks that genetics, right? Oh, it's all genetics. Well, no, genetics really is a very small percentage. 75 to 90% of what determines our health expression is environmental and lifestyle driven. So it's not just do you have a genetic code. It's how are you informing that code will determine how it expresses or represses, creating health or disease. And so I had to really kind of work on my own belief system. And so I really kind of started to learn and learn and learn. And I know this is a long answer, but I'll tie this up here in just a moment. Because I think it's so important. I believe that we all are sovereign individuals. We get to be empowered by our own choices, right? Some choices help us. Some choices, they're not maybe our best friend. They can create some obstacles for us. And so to me, longevity, as I really started to understand the science of it, and look at what these hallmarks of aging are, which is really everything I taught was complex systems. It's understanding we are a complex human system. We are not a piece or a part. And longevity was really the first approach to try to attempt to say, okay, there's all this research from all over the world, and we're finding each lab was finding what they thought was the reason why we age. And then they kind of all said, wait, no, wait, there's multiple reasons why we age. And we
Right.
really look, we can start to see that there's some complex, there's interplay. We're not a piece or a part, there's interplay. And so this framework was developed. And what I love is I had a lot of students. I teach. I've been certifying doctors for a long, long time. I was partnered with a different academy, and all my students started to say, "When are you going to teach us longevity?" And so I was like, "You guys want to know it?" And I ran a longevity summit 3 years in a row. I wrote a best-selling book, Codes of Longevity, and I could see that there was a need and an interest and a desire from the consumer, but I realized the doctors weren't getting it, but the consumer was seeking it out. Like, they're kinda knocking on my door going, "Do you have somebody you can refer us to?" And so I just started to look at the landscape and realize that even the education model was really lacking because
Right.
longevity pairs all of it together, that we're not just treating symptoms. We're understanding at a cellular level what's happening in the outer world, informing the inner world, and we can create a process that we pair lifestyle and molecules and therapeutic modalities with ancient wisdom and practices. And it's this gorgeous interplay that creates massive health expression that can completely transform the trajectory of humanity. So, yes, it can help us all personally, but it can also like change generations to come. So I'm kind of on a mission, and we've been around now for 3 years, and we're just skyrocketing. It's phenomenal.
That's awesome. And at what point did peptides and peptide bioregulators come on your radar?
So I started looking at peptides. So Dr. Jim Laval is a friend of mine. He's one of the co-chairs for A4M. And Jim was one of the first people with Dr. William Seeds out there really teaching about peptides. So about 8 years ago, right? So peptides have been around for a long time, but A4M and the International Peptide Society was really the first group to bring it out in a framework, in a model. So I started to dip my toe in the water of peptides probably 6 years ago. And really, it's been over the past 3 years, I mean, as I look at the science, as I look what's happening, I love peptides so much because of the many ways that they support healing and health optimization in the system. So they really pair so perfectly to longevity, because we can use peptides for healing. We can use peptides for, health optimization. We can use peptides for age reversal, life extension, right? For sexual health, for cognitive enhancement. There's just so many beautiful ways that these signaling molecules can really, really support the human system in pretty profound ways. So,
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, especially so my first foray into peptides was using thymosin alpha 1 and thymosin beta 4.
yeah,
And a lot of people think, oh, immune system. Well, that's incredibly important, right? But also, the healthier your immune system, the easier it is to gain muscle and lose body fat. So, that's the thing. What would be called side effects in allopathic medicine are just added benefits in functional and regenerative medicine.
completely, 100%. And because these molecules are pleiotropic, and they do have multiple modes of action. So I love how you just said it. And a great way to think of that is multiple benefits to them. And, as consumers, we're not educated to realize that, yes, the body, every system is affecting every other system.
Mm.
And there is kind of a top down hierarchy. Like some systems drive other systems very significantly. Like metabolic health is one of the most fundamental drivers of our immune system, of our reproductive system, of our cognitive function. Like there's so many things that end up happening by way of kind of just one system. But we've all been taught, again, a traditional allopathic model that says we're a machine, we're mechanistic, we're a piece or a part, a thyroid or a gallbladder, and we're not we've never been given the opportunity as individuals, unless somebody's educated themselves, like I'm sure your audience is really quite
Yeah.
educated in this, but we don't appreciate the symphony that is the human body and the
Right.
interconnected conversations that a little can go a long way in producing phenomenal results.
Yeah, I think it was about a year and a half ago that Carl Lenore from Superhuman Radio, he
Mhm.
had a stroke. And I remember seeing his post on Facebook. He was one of the first podcasts I was on back in the day.
Mhm.
So I still follow him and, stay in touch on Facebook. But he had his nephew give him an injection of thymosin beta 4. And, he had a stroke, but he was back in the gym, I think within a week, and he wasn't lifting as heavy, but still. So like thymosin beta 4 we associate with immune function, but it also has important benefits for the cardiovascular system and increased vascularization. So
Yeah.
like you said, there's multiple benefits. Let's
Yeah.
talk about some of the hallmarks of aging. So genomic
Yeah.
instability, like DNA adducts, decreased
Yeah.
cellular communication. What are the main hallmarks of aging?
Well, we've got 12 of them. And I think it's important to appreciate that there's kind of, then the 12 go into really three core categories. And so again, for simplicity, because we could spend and we can go through them all if you guys want, but I think that for interest for the audience, the primaries are really all around our DNA. So if we just start there and appreciate that, yes, the DNA is our code of life, it's our instruction manual. And so we think about, I like to keep things really simplistic, but if you want something more, by all means, Dr. Tim, ask me. I'm not trying to minimize anybody. I like,
Sure.
I like metaphors. I like to be able to easily wrap my head and my heart around something so I can go, oh, this is why I should care about it,
Right.
right? So, as our code of life, I like to think of it like, okay, so your DNA is there. It's literally your instruction manual that anytime anything is needed with inside of us, it's opened up. Like, okay, let's go to that page. Let's pull out that recipe
Mm.
card. Now we've got to, right? All of a sudden we've got to replicate this piece of this recipe so that we can make this, so that we can produce this. And so what we get to understand is that all that our DNA is and all this replication process consists of require amino acids. Amino acids are broken down from protein, right? And amino acids are what peptides are. So if we think about it, again, like they are these essential building blocks, literally to life in the body. And so as we chronologically age, one of the first things that we see is really a breakdown in how well the genetic code is read, replicated, and repaired. So when we start to think about why do we age, do we have to, and what if anything can we do to slow down and or reverse that process? It's kind of like that's the mindset going, okay, can we change aging? Well, the first answer is yes, we can. Okay. So if that's the hypothesis, can we? Let's figure it out. What are causative factors? What are things that we see? Well, we're not reading it right. So what happens if we don't read it right? What happens if we don't replicate it right? Well, that's where we get mutations, right? All of a sudden we don't get a proper copy. So if you don't get the code copied right, it's not going to work right. Right. And then all of a sudden it's not going to form right. And so when we go through any given day, we have literally hundreds of thousands of breaks in our DNA every single day. Every single day, our DNA needs to be repaired. So a part of it is it's not always about making more. Sometimes we just need to keep up. Like, it's like
Right.
keeping the house clean. And so if we don't have the right tools to do the right job, we can't keep up with the breakdown that's occurring. And that's one of especially in modern westernized society, because of the stress loads, physical, mental, emotional, chemical, environmental. We have so much burden coming in on the system, which is creating more work, more demands that we have to keep up with. And that means, do we have enough protein? Are we able to replicate? Are we able to read? Are we able to get the code? Like, are we interpreting the information right? And so that primary, I think what becomes most important is when we look at this foundational category, because it's genomic stability, meaning like, is the DNA stable? Is it breaking? If it's breaking, can we repair it? What's really at play with that? A lot of the toxicant burden is one of the first things. So things in our environment. And we go into telomere attrition, we go into epigenetic alteration. So we're looking, and even nutrient sensing, kind of how the pathways are have been kind of put
Mhm.
into this now. So it's how are we reading and how are we responding to the inputs from the environment to be able to keep up with the demands. As we as we go into the second category, it is kind of that response. So like the first is like, okay, here are the things that are breaking it down, but now how do we respond to it? So we start to look at our mitochondria. We're looking at these cellular pathways. We're saying, what are we reading? Like, okay, and this is where we get into a lot of metabolics. And this is where we get into cellular health and cellular membrane. So when I talk about, do we have the right tools to do the right job? And I'll to pause here, do you want to unpack but before I go into this next category?
So,
But what we miss so commonly, Tim, is that we are not giving the body what it needs to make energy. So we break down the cells, make energy, use energy. When we make it, we need certain things to make it. And when we make it, this is how we're also then signaling DNA and making new tissues, right? And so we need certain nutrients in to run cellular metabolic processes. We need certain materials to be able to pull the waste out. And oftentimes we aren't even getting in fundamental nutrients that allow us to slow down the rate and pace of aging. We're so busy thinking we need some new pill or some new treatment. We haven't just looked at some really basic common sense, lifestyle choices that could radically change how we feel, how we think, how we look, how we perform, and how we live. So before I go any further, like, what do you want to unpack with that?
well, so to summarize, the first category was DNA
Yeah.
alterations, right? And
Yeah.
then metabolic regulation. Okay. But with the cellular communication that you touched on, we know, 30% of the cell membrane is made of cholesterol. And if we have too many omega-6 fatty acids, it becomes too stiff. We don't want it to be too stiff, but we also don't want it to be too permeable. So
Right.
talk to us a little bit about cell membrane and how it should look.
So the cell membrane is really one of the conversations that's kind of leading. It's now emerging as a very important, because we've for so long looked at what happens inside of the cell. But remember, to your point, the cell membrane is simply saying, can we get the good stuff in and the bad stuff out? Real simple. And so, we do need these essential fatty acids. And so, like, that's one of the first things. And it does need to just have this beautiful buoyancy to be able to receive. And one of the things that's happening is, not only do we have a pro-inflammatory outer environment. So what's the environment around the cell? And you just mentioned omega 6s. And so what's interesting about that is, again, we need them, but we don't need as much of them as we are consuming.
Right.
And so when we have too many, then they create a very pro-inflammatory state. And and then that can create not only inflammation, right? But that causes problems outside of the cell. So I like to think of it, again, keeping things simple, as a lot of noise. So it's like they're crowding, right? Kind of crowding the gates for what needs to come in to come in. So we have to look and say, well, okay, we need essential fatty acids and we need the right balance. We need more of those omega 3s. And so that's a really simple thing. We can change that by what's on the end of the fork. We can look, do we need to exogenously supplement? But one of the other things that's happening that's affecting this cell membrane is really this cell redox. So, kind of this acid alkaline balance, again, outer, inner. There are these really fine-tuned mechanisms at play that ensure that everything keeps operating intelligently. And sometimes we listen to wonderful podcasts like this, and I'm raising my hand. I do it too, gang. Like, I'm not in judgment of anybody. We get so excited about the next new thing.
Yeah.
We want to start taking it, right? Like, all we want to take all the things because it must be great. More must always mean better. But often what we do is we create a greater imbalance in the system, especially if we're not already optimized. If we have any state of breakdown, dysfunction, or disease, we have some level of signs and symptomatology. That's a real simple way to realize that your body is a little overloaded. It's working harder than it needs to. It needs a little extra support. And so I say it often that even good can become bad in an overloaded system. What do I mean by this? We think that good is taking, for example, a lot of antioxidants. So that's one of the things that's often been promoted, especially in the longevity space. We look at blue zones, we look at diets, we talk about the types of foods and the polyphenols and all this. Yes, they're very antioxidant rich. But a lot of times we'll take so many exogenous from the out to the in supplements, we don't realize what these nutrients are doing to actually create an imbalance in what's supposed to be happening in the cell. So it's almost like we think we're helping it, but we actually create more problems. We create more work for it. It doesn't signal as efficiently. So I think step one, that cell membrane needs just a really beautiful balance of good essential fatty acids. That's the really, really, really and truly what it needs. It needs a lower inflammatory toxicant burden outside of it so that it can get the right basic nutrients in. Basic nutrients are just vitamins, minerals, enzymes, water. Like it's light. It's so simple. It's so simple. A, our B's, E, D, C, right? It's not complex stuff. And we can get all this from our end of our fork. We need, we just need some of those good enzymes. And we need I keep saying essential fatty acids because that's what makes up this really healthy cell membrane.
Absolutely. And in terms of the third category, what's behind the curtain there?
Yeah, so the integrative. So again, so the primary, right? It's all about the DNA. The secondary or the antagonistics, that's where we're getting into the mitochondria. It's really where we are looking at kind of I think this is important. I want to say this before I go into the third category because this is something that we hear often. And I believe that there's a couple of areas your audience might enjoy diving in depending on your other guests. In the primary, there's telomere attrition. So
Mhm.
telomeres continue to be a really interesting conversation around longevity. So we can kind of put a pin in that if you want to come back and talk. I've got some opinions on it, opinions and some science, so we can explore. In this secondary, the antagonistic category, the responses to kind of what's coming in, this is where we start to really look at what's called cellular senescence. So, cellular senescence is a really, really big conversation in longevity, why we age. So, it starts in the primary category, it kind of builds to a head in the secondary. In the third category, it's the result of all of this. Okay, so this is kind of how we're telling a story. So, cellular senescence is inside of the cell. Um, every cell, as it goes through its metabolic cycle, there becomes a point where it is supposed to die, right? It's got a normal life cycle. And senescent cells basically become highly distressed cells. And they go into kind of this twilight state. So, this senescence, they're not alive and functioning the way they're supposed to. They're still alive, but they're just kind of like a zombie. So they've been lovingly termed zombie cells because they're not doing anything except they're so stressed that they start to send out the signal. They're called SAPs, and they impact the other
They're
cells
called
in the
what?
SAPs. So they're SAPs signals. So it's the secretory, signaling that's literally going, I'm super stressed. Everybody should know it because there's something bad going on here. If we're
Right.
like being really basic with it. So what happens is it changes the other cells in the immediate area. So they kind of go into a coherent signaling with it. And then they start. So when something is senescent, it loses normal function. But unfortunately, if it's not going through apoptosis and being removed, now it's like it's just taking up space. So we have less function, we have more like just more obstacle, right? Like there's more in these little spaces that's just kind of clogging up the work, so to speak. So one of the big approaches in longevity and can we slow down the rate and pace of aging is to say, can we reduce this senescent cell burden? Because as we go into the third category of the hallmarks of aging, this is what's referred to as the integrative. And again, it's kind of the result of, and this is where things like dysbiosis and stem cell exhaustion and chronic inflammation, which of course we lovingly call inflammaging, these are all being expressed. So all of a sudden, things that are the reason that patients are coming in to see a functional med doc, right? My God, I've got signs and symptoms. I'm tired all the time. I ache. I can't think. I've got foggy brain. My gut health is terrible. I'm not repairing. Like I'm breaking down. Well, these are all expressions of accelerated biological aging. So at a cellular level, we've got things that are continuing to one thing goes to the other, goes to the other, to now we're like in full expression of what we would call a symptom or a problem. But here's the great news is that again, when we know the problem, we know the solution. So all this is that we've got either too much or not enough. So when we realize that, hey, we've got stem cell exhaustion, for example, we have this chronic inflammation. And now this goes back to the conversation you brought up earlier about looking at the thymic peptides, right? So all of a sudden, when we get into this category, this is really relevant. The older we get, the greater that load because we're living more life, we're doing more things, we're in more environments, we're taking more on. Again, stressors are simply a demand to the system. If we can't keep up with the demand, it becomes a distressor. There are many stressors that are called eustress. They're positive stress. There's even hormetic stress that challenges the system to actually become stronger. But the kind of stress that we all think about that leads to chronic inflammation, that's the overload. And as we go through our lives, we just have more responsibilities, more things. And so we break down and we don't have as much coming in to keep up with that rate of breakdown. So by the time we're in our 40s, our 50s, our 60s, it feels like, oh, I'm just getting older. Well, you just haven't given your body enough of what it needs. So it's feeling really symptomatic. You think there's a problem, it just can't keep up and it needs a little help. So we can look at this and start to go, oh, there's a roadmap here. There's a way that we can start to support the cells. And as we support the cells, we support the system, we support the entire complex human system, and we can measure this through that rate and pace of biological aging, and we can see where we're at, and we can start to see as we reduce these loads, the signals become clearer, the cell functions faster and better, it replicates, it repairs, right? And that aging process slows. And if we're not aging as fast as the years on the birthday cake, we actually start to age in reverse. And this is where we can hit what's referred to as the longevity velocity, escape velocity. And so these are some of the kind of buzzwords and stuff in longevity. So that's kind of the way to think about the hallmarks as a whole. Does that help? Did it make sense?
Yeah.
What do we need to dive more into? Okay.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense. Very thorough answer. In terms of measuring, the rate of aging, do you like the Dunedin pace scale?
Yeah, I mean, true diagnostics really has, and that's of course what they use. They're really right now the most comprehensive. There are other tests on the market, and it kind of depends on what you want to look at, but I like that as a whole. And here's what I will tell people is that this idea of biological aging, it gets attacked at times because every system in the body actually ages at a different pace. So we are getting better with our clocks. So every cell in your body actually has a clock, but every system we can start, we're getting better and better with the research and the data to see the rate of different organs and systems, as well as kind of this idea of this global marker. And so I tell people like, you know, this is going to get us close. But what this does more than anything is it fundamentally shows us change. Are we moving in a good direction or not so great? Are we slowing down and we're going to have more life, years to our life and life to our years, or are we like racing to the grave and it's not going to be a fun journey getting there? Where it's going to be filled with a lot of bumps and bruises and aches and pains. So we get to be in control. What I mean is like we get to have empowerment over, wait, I can actually really do something. This isn't just treating a symptom. We can fundamentally change our biology by how we're living and the choices we're making and the things that we're doing. We can live better. We don't have to, I say aging is optional. We don't have to age the way that we've all historically thought of aging. We can radically transform it.
Yeah, I heard a good saying. I've said it differently for years, but I heard it well articulated recently that if the body sends out whispers, essentially, and if you don't listen to those whispers, you'll be forced to listen to the screams.
Yeah. It's true, and I think, Tim, I really wanna let people know, like, I am passionate about this stuff, but I'm also not on my soapbox, meaning, like, I do fully believe in our sovereign choice, and just because we can doesn't always mean that we will or that we should. So, some people are gonna listen, and they're gonna feel inspired, and they're gonna wanna do something. Others are gonna be like, "Eh, why should I even care?" Like, better living through chemistry, or I'm just gonna, my doctor says something different. I'm just gonna take my pill. So I'm not here to judge anybody's choices. I'm really not. But I believe that when we open ourselves up without bias, like if we're just willing to be curious and explore the field of possibility, we can kind of look at things at different angles and perspectives. If I look at it from the left versus the right or from above versus below, I'm going to see something different. And then that's
Right.
gonna just give me more information that I can then be at choice with. And I think if there's anything that I hope to empower people with is to realize that, you know, you don't have to just age. You don't have to
Right.
just, right? Like, meaning you are filled with pure potential and you really are a creator of your expression and you get to have this journey any way you want it. So if you want to be miserable, be miserable. If you want to be happy, be happy. If you want to be neutral, be neutral. It's all good. Just embrace it and then go, hell yeah, let's ride this out. Let's go with it. So
Right.
I think there's a lot we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on with our human potential. Like really, really getting a sense of what we are capable of.
You mentioned telomeres. So for
Yeah.
listeners, those are the caps, the bookends
Yeah.
on the end of your DNA. Too
Hmm.
short, you're going to age rapidly. Too long, you can get things like cancer. So you don't want them too short or too long. But things like epitalon
Hmm.
can help to elongate telomeres, correct?
Yes, 100%. And really, gosh, 10, even was it 15 years 10, 15 years ago, the dominant thought was your telomeres predict your lifespan, and we now absolutely know that is not correct, but they do correlate with health span. And the difference is simply lifespan is how many years versus health span is how many lifespan, how many years are you living? Health span
Mhm.
is how many years are you living well, healthy, free of symptoms, sickness,
Right.
disease. And we currently have a quite a significant gap, spanning over, there's a couple of different numbers out there, anywhere from 9.5 to upwards of 14 years, depending on the territories we're looking at. But we have essentially the last decade of life for most people is a decade of decline and frailty and symptoms and sickness and medications, and nobody's excited about that
Right.
as a future. So when we look at a marker like a telomere and we go, oh, I can do something here, and this correlates to shortening that decade. Instead of 10 years, it can be 5 years that I only have poor health, or it could be 3 years, or it could be 1 year, it could be 1 month. Like we
Right.
don't have to have a decade of sickness. And so yes, Opie Talon is phenomenal. Like the research is pretty significant in showing how it does correlate with a lengthening of the telomeres. And what's really exciting, and what you guys, I'm sure you'll be having more conversations. You've already spoken to Dr. Kent and to Natalie and a few of us. As more and more come out, we're going to see it more this year and ongoing about bioregulators. And as Kavanaugh's research comes more to the forefront because it was kept kind of under lock and key for so long over in Russia, that we're really looking at these protocols. And what's super interesting is while there are many different bioregulators and there's exciting information that we're going to all deep dive into and start to do more research on, what we know repeatedly is that when in the stack, when they put together pineal, which is epitalon, and thymic, right? So when we put a thymic glandular and a pineal glandular, which is now we're thinking the thymogen, like so the thymic division of peptides, we're thinking epitolon, we're putting these together and it's like the power stack. If you wanted to do anything, if I could tell people the easiest way that we know we have research, the safest way, and you don't stay on epitalon ongoing, but with the bioregulator, there is a pineal, right, bioregulator that you can stay on consistently. But if you're going to do the peptide, you're going to cycle it 1 to 2 times a year. And you're on it for 10 days. It's a very short cycle. So it's something that we can do and we can put in the rotation of some of those longevity best practices. And that in and of itself will move the needle. And you can look at it in biological testing. We can look at length of telomeres in our testing models now. But when we start to stack in the bioregulators, now we're looking at long-term immune support. And I know Dr. Kent talked about this because he always does, right? How that
Yeah.
thymus gland involutes as we chronologically age. And so I mean, come on, gang, like we need a healthy immune system, right? Like, so it's pretty paramount. And when that immune system isn't responding, that accelerates the amount of inflammaging, the lack of ability to respond and to repair. So these things kind of all loop, have a negative feedback loop on each other if we kind
Yeah.
of think back to the hallmarks.
Yeah, absolutely. And like inflammaging, the NLRP3 inflammasome. So interleukin 6, TNF alpha, interleukin 1 beta. Like, if I were Dr. Evil and I wanted to make Dr. Melissa feel horrible, I would draw up some inflammatory cytokines, some lipopolysaccharides, which stimulate inflammatory cytokines, and I'd inject you with them, and then you'd be in a fetal position in like 45 minutes. And so the immune system, like
Sure.
if we yeah. If we take something like cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, my first question back in the day, like 15 years ago, was why are there foam cells, immature macrophages in arterial plaque? Oh, it's that dang cholesterol, red meat, it's killing you. Well, no, what cholesterol is just the body's response to inflammation. And
Mhm.
so again, and Dr. Kent and I talked about this, the thymic peptides and peptide bioregulators, they're kind of like adaptogens for the immune system. You would
Correct.
think if you gave someone with an autoimmune or neuroimmune disorder a thymic peptide or peptide bioregulator, it would worsen their clinical situation, but it doesn't. It balances it out. And
Mhm.
so we talked about, having a robust Th1 response, and a
Yeah.
lack of robustness is a hallmark of aging. So he said, no matter what I look at, whether it's MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, anything, cancer, it's lack of a robust Th1 response.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so, I mean, this is what is exciting, that I think we are moving to a time, I believe, I actually, well, yeah, we are just, we're moving to a time that we can do less and less. Like, we don't need to take as many things. We can be more intelligent with the type of products that we're taking, the type of molecule. I refer to everything under the umbrella. If we're going to take it in, it's a molecule, right? If it's there to affect physiological or cellular health. Um, and so I can't tell you, and I'm sure you have this all the time, doc, how many times, especially in a functional practice, patients or clients will come in with 20, 30 bottles of supplement. I'm taking this and this and this and this and this and this. I'm like, do you know why you're taking all those things? Well, no. Or, oh, I saw this, or I saw that, or I read that this could be good, or that could be good. I literally had a former patient last night. She sent me 6 different bottles. And I'm like, all right. well, this isn't this isn't this, but this is this, filler. This has this form that doesn't convert. Like, I'm just like, this is all junk. And it's actually junking up the works of your system and then actually adding to that inflammatory response, right? So my point is that to be able to support the immune system, to be able to support. So there's a couple of things that we really get to do very well. We want to be able to support our genome first and foremost. If our code of life, like how can we do better at that? Well, one of the things that we measure with the pace of aging is actually these methylation marks. And as we chronologically age, the more we are having dysregulated methylation, we are closing off more and more access to our code. Now, again, if we keep it really easy, it's just like, hey, it's not safe. It's not safe, not safe. Like we're putting down all these marks. We're taking notes. We're taking notes about what is going on here in this body because of all these inputs coming in. Not safe, not safe, not safe, not safe, not safe. Close it down, lock it in. They can't have access to that. And so the less of our code that we have access to, the the less quality of the replication. Like you're not going to be able to make that same recipe. If all of a sudden, you needed flour and you can't get it, like it's not going to come out right. Those cookies are not going to come out right. So that's kind of my point to it. So step one is we can look at how do we improve methylation? And again, how do we reduce some of these outer world burdens, inflammatory burdens, stressors that overload the system? If we can do a little less of that, which a lot of that can just be lifestyle choices, we don't have to take a lot of molecules in,
Right.
but we can do some things to help clean it out, right? So that's kind of foundational medicine. What are some things that we can do to clean it out using some binders and things like that, like to really help to get some of the things out, improve liver, detoxification, glutathione, a few things like that, making sure that the cells got CoQ10 and omega-3, a couple of basic things. We've got our right Bs, we got our methylfolate, right? We got our B12, we got a couple basic things that just help to give it what it needs so it can get the gunk out. But if we take care of our DNA, then we get to take care of the next part is our metabolics. So we're kind of going around this hallmark scale. So we take care of our DNA. Now the next big drivers that lead that impact that immune system, and I'm coming back to where you just started us, is
Mm.
all about metabolic pathways, right? It's
Mm.
all about our metabolics. What is going on with our glucose? What is going on with our insulin? This is why we're seeing such a craze about the GLP-1s. It's why they've exploded in popularity because we have 73.6% of the population that's obese or overweight. And we know, right, that that's metabolic dysfunction that drives all these other chronic disease processes. It also drives the rate and pace of aging and breakdown and dysfunction at a cellular level or overloading the system. So there are a few things that we can do very simply, again, with lifestyle, and then with some peptides to begin to fine tune our metabolic pathways. And then finally, we want to end with that immune support. So, again, coming back to the thymus. So there's just a few things that we need. Like we don't need a
Right.
lot,
Right.
you
And,
know?
when we support the immune system, it decreases inflammation throughout the body. You have more anabolic potential. You recover
Yeah.
better from workouts. Your energy is going to be better. I tell people all the time, I think pretty much every disorder and disease known to man has an immune system component. Like there's
Completely.
always some skewing of Th1, Th2, Th17,
Yeah.
Th3, etc. Um, there's been some talk about this trade-off, and Natalie Nidham touched on this. If you look at Olympic athletes who've been training, even though they're performing at a high level, they're also aging at a fast rate. So performance comes at a cost. So
Yeah.
talk about the delicate balance, sort of that seesaw between performance and longevity.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. You know, i- Again, this is where I say even good becomes bad in a overloaded system. So, when we are training at a level like an Olympic athlete, again, they're starting at a young age. And so any of us, even one of a marker that accelerates aging is over exercising. So too much exercise. So there's a couple of things that are happening as we go into the lane of performance. We are putting a lot of demands on the body And are we having the right amount of time to recover? So the average person is not the Olympic athlete, and yet it's great to be able to look at them to go, wow, when we overtrain, because that's their job. Like they got to show up and they've got to be at their best and at their peak, and they got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing their systems day over day, year over year. And so, while I think it continues to get better, like we are in such a time that we understand unequivocally the importance of recovery, and is the body being supported to properly recover? Because if we're not recovered the next day, then it's like you're already at a deficit. And if you're going to put the same load that you put on the system the day before, but at a deficit, you're making that system work even harder. Now, here's what happens: that is a stress response. And stress, when we are in this stress response, it is a pro inflammatory state. It is a catabolic state. When we are in this chronic, always signaling these pathways, it actually does lead to breakdown. So we're not giving the system time to actually, again, repair and recover to build back up. We just keep chipping away at it, chipping away at it, chipping away at it. And it's
Right.
like just breaking it down. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe the answer is, I mean, maybe this feels too simplistic, but we're being invited in to better know thyself
Mhm.
first and foremost. Go, wait, do I feel overloaded? Do I feel exhausted?
Right.
Then do I use my wearable device? Do I see that my body battery is at a 72%? And I'm going to go like do a hit training this morning, and I'm going to fast, and I'm going to like, those are all stressors. And I'm going to go cold plunge. That's not going to help your system actually recover right now. Right. Like when you're already
Right.
tanked, like you need to go rest for a minute. So we are being ushered into a time, invited in to go, okay, I can do
Mm.
a 20-minute versus a 45-minute. Because when we go over that, 35, 39-minute threshold at at an aerobic to anaerobic level, to cellular level, we're going to go into a stress response. We're going to use cortisol to keep kicking out glucose so that we can kind of keep up with that workload. So balance is the answer. A little less than more on certain days. Take time to rest. Focus on your sleep. If I could tell anybody anything, focus on your sleep. Focus on your timing of when you're doing things, because you can actually work with your body versus against it. And the more we work with our innate kind of cues,
Mhm.
it's less stress. It's less stress. So the more we can like chip away stressors, then we just kind of optimize overall efficiency.
I remember reading a study probably 6 or 7 years ago where they looked at people who were highly stressed. They self-identified as being stressed, and the people with low vitamin D levels and the people who exercise. So you had the high vitamin D and the people who exercised, and the low vitamin D and people who didn't exercise. And even though they were both stressed, self-reported roughly the same level of
Yeah.
stress, but the people with high vitamin D and people who exercise, they were able to mitigate some of the damage to their telomeres.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if we just kind of pull back and from, a little bit, like vitamin D is an essential nutrient hormone to the body, and it's involved in so many processes, and especially hormone production. Hormones are signalers, peptides are signalers. They're both one and the same. So if we want to be able to make sure that messages are being sent, that recovery and repair can occur, when I make that very generalized statement of we got to have the right tools to do the right job, like it's we really do need just our basic nutrients, and we can get so much vitamin D just by being outside. Of course, we know we're, in these just junk food, fake light kind of environments that we're not getting that nutrient of the sun
Right.
in to help with the conversion and the production of some of these really foundational hormones and nutrients to kind of keep to be able to help us to recover, because that's what it comes down to. Can I repair and recover? Can I respond to the demand that just occurred?
Right.
Do I have what I need? So, yeah.
And that's, people give me a hard time because my workouts are only like 45 minutes. I go 4 to 5 days a week, typically 2 days on,
Perfect.
1 day off. But they're like, oh, well, I'm here 2.5 hours. And I'm like, okay, talk to me in 6 months when you're burned
Yep.
out.
Yep.
Like it's easy to be successful. And I know because I've done it like back in college because you have more free time.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between being fit and being
Yes.
healthy. And that's why we
Correct.
see, like when I lived in Atlanta, I had a friend and colleague, her husband was very muscular, six-pack abs, dropped dead of a massive heart attack. And so, we got to look underneath the hood at least
Yeah.
twice a year,
Yeah.
see what our inflammatory state is, what our micronutrient status is, what our omega-3 fatty acid levels are.
Completely. And I, really and truly, I believe if people are not already doing it, you don't have to wear them every day, but we really can learn so much about ourselves with integrating some wearable technology. It's not 100%, but it shows you patterns. It gives you it's
Mhm.
just a biofeedback tool. And
Right.
so being able to collect and see, not just like, oh, I'm fine. Well, okay, are you? How's your body perceiving what you're doing? If your body is perceiving that what you're doing is great, and you are recovering and you have a low resting heart rate and your HRV is elevated, and you're getting good deep and REM sleep, like just some of these basic things, you've got good oxygen saturation, then I'll agree with you. You're doing good. But if we're seeing that you're not getting the sleep, your HRV is tanked, your resting heart rate is elevated, like some of like your body battery is not recovering, then I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're not doing good. Your body's telling you it's not doing good. And
Yeah.
it needs either more of some of those basic foundational nutrient tools to kind of meet the metabolic demand at the cellular level, or it needs less of some of the demands coming in. So it's like, can you wait an extra hour? Can you go at 50% instead of 150%? Just the first few hours of the day, like let yourself come into it. Make sure you're getting good sunlight. Go out and immediately, like a lot of times, and Dr. Rimke and I talk a lot about this, so many people, we are in such an energy crisis. We are just so depleted of our life force. And last year, she and I did a 30-day circadian rhythm challenge with about 5,000 people. And the results that we saw in just 30 days of people coming off meds, of people like completely like shedding weight in 30 days,
Wow.
radically transforming their health in 30 days with a couple of very basic circadian principles. Every morning they had to get out and get just even as little as 1 minute of sunlight in the first 90 minutes of waking. We really talked to them about the timing of the meals and circadian fasting principles. We kept it super duper simple. But because we have to get energy into the system and we have to work with it versus against it. So it's like if there's one thing people could do that really will set them up for greater charge and recovery is actually to get sunlight first thing in the morning, because it's going to set them up for better sleep at night. It's going to set up their hormones to signal more efficiently, right? So that they can respond and then recover and repair better. So it doesn't take a long time to do a couple basic things and we start to see really radical shifts in the system.
I have a saying, the biophysics drives the biochemistry. So we get a lot more from the sun than just vitamin D, the photons,
Yeah.
the light, um, it helps with ATP production. It
Hmm.
helps with the entrainment of the circadian rhythm, which
Yeah.
controls intracellular NAD pools. And so again,
Yes.
we're back to like, we can sit here and pop stuff and inject stuff, or we can just go outside. I mean, the injections are good and you need some of that,
Yeah.
and the supplements are good and you need some of that, but you also can't just sit here under artificial blue light like I am right now,
Yeah. Me
and
too.
yeah, and expect to be healthy.
Yeah.
So what's something
It,
well, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
What's something today to be true that you wish you would have known 10 to 12 years ago?
Ooh. Is this personal or from a scientific or just in any
Either
category?
one. Either one.
Well, I would say I actually wish I would have understood the power of circadian biology 10 years ago and how it truly directs not only the rate and pace of aging, but it directs all of our metabolic and hormonal signaling and pathways and how important, like, so I mean, I just feel like it is an element, an area of science. It's funny how, you know, obviously in 2017, Nobel Prize, so it's hasn't even really been known for 10 years. So I think I would have loved to have known that 10 years ago because like I said, when I see how such small shifts can radically improve the expression of aliveness in a human being, um, it's like, oh, it really then correlates with it is easier than we make it. And I'm the worst at this, gang. I love to make things more complex for myself than they need to be, but it really is simple. So I think it's the reminder. I wish I could have told myself, like, wait. Really is simple. Don't have to do a lot. Less is more. And every cell in your body has a clock that connects to this light dark. And when we queue up with the light and the dark, and we do just a couple little things, everything's going to be on time, in time, as it should be, so that you age slower versus faster. You have greater health, greater vitality, you know, just you're going to really love your life a whole lot more.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the work that you're doing. We'll keep up with you and hopefully we can have you back on in the future if we can get in touch with you. Not just kidding. For some
Sorry.
updates.
That won't happen again, I promise.
All right. I think I saw on Instagram that like your car broke down in Alabama or something. Was that true? Did I get that right?
That was true. That was true. Y'all, Tim did some interesting research on me before, and we had some interesting conversations before we started. But yes, my car did break down. I was there for a week because I have a Rover and the parts are really hard to get. And where I broke down, like I was in a Rover desert. There was no get parts in, and we had to wait and you couldn't use aftermarket. And I finally, and they kept, I'm like, I'm just going to put it on a tow truck and just tow it back to, you know, to North Carolina. And they're like, no. The mechanic place I was at, the whatever, the shop, they're like, no, just, we've got this, we're going to take care of it. You don't need to take on that extra expense. Let us take care of you. And I should have just followed my instinct from the beginning because I ended up having to put it on flatbed and tow it back anyway.
Wow.
So it was a very expensive little journey. And Stephanie and I, Dr. Imke and I were just coming back from a meeting in Florida all about peptides. We were down doing some stuff with a big peptide company. And so we made it a road trip. And it was like, what? Why? So that was a fun little unexpected week working out of a hotel room. Thank God I had my computer.
It sounds like it. Well, Melissa, thank you so much. Thanks for the work that you're doing again, and we'll have you back on in the future.
All right, Tim, thank you so much, Dr. Tim. I appreciate you and your entire crew. Take care.
Thank you.